Hello, this is Feral Vincent. Today, we will enter a new realm. A realm that has begun with a new story and a new tale. A tale of a broken man as he enters his journey into healing. Every story has a beginning, and in this tale, we shall see from the beginning how it unfolds.
It was Moss the Chronicler who said that the land of Valisthea is blessed in the light of the Mother Crystals, and that it was this light which finally led our forebears out of the darkness. Yet, what they saw in the light gave rise to temptation. Temptation that ever lures us back into the crystal shadow. And thus did our journey begin.
So, as we've seen from the previous clip, in Final Fantasy XVI, we kind of get a very brief look into what we're supposed to be set up for the story. What ends up happening is we kind of cut to a very dramatic fight between two titanic creatures of fire. And it's a great beginning. It really does work well. But I want to stop the clip where I do, because that's where it should stop. From there, you continue on with a little thing where you can spam a button and kind of try to dodge them. It doesn't matter what you do, because ultimately, you cut to a part of the game where the main character is in the future by 13 years, and you can see him sitting next to a fire with a bunch of people. And I'm continuing the clip behind a lot of this audio, right? That way you can continue to see where it picks up off from where I'm going. But I wanted to kind of slow things down here to speak in detail about the story and why this beginning could have been chosen, but also I have some critiques. And I say this not because Square Enix has done a poor job of creating a story. I just don't necessarily agree with the creative decision to jump around so much. So, the reason we can continue into this future where you see Clive with a tattoo on his cheek and you see him walk kind of around this particular battlefield is to set up sort of the first act of the game for him. This journey is one that Clive is going through after he became a very broken man. And that broken, sort of beat down person is the one you cut to. And this is the first decision that I disagree with. And the reason being is you don't necessarily get a chance to really feel the same feelings that Clive does at the beginning of the game, only because you don't know what he has been through. You do not know his story, as it were. What you know at this point is that you're now being called Wyvern, and that you are trying to go and assassinate a dominant of Shiva, right? And you kind of get a little bit of a backdrop of the clash between, I believe it is Walud, and the Holy Empire of Sabrake, or whatever the full name of them is. Um, you get this sort of beginning where you're getting kind of thrust into this conflict that you don't know much about. And that's not always a bad thing, right? You're not going to have a beginning that spells out everything for you. I just feel like we could do a little better. So, when we talk about where we go from here, we start to push through the story a little bit. We get into a sort of memory that goes back in time, and we learn a little bit about Clive's story. And so we're going to talk a lot about that part of the story. But before we do, I just wanted to address what this beginning is and why it's being done. We're being put into this part of the story because the beginning part, as it was originally written, isn't meant to matter all that much. It exists to give context for Clive. However, the way it is written does not allow it to be relevant while you're living it as the viewer. It is meant to give Clive a story and a backdrop from a narrative perspective. However, as the person who is experiencing the narrative for the first time, you get insight and knowledge into the outcome before you finish the story. It's kind of like knowing the end of the book before you get into the actual book. This happens a lot in cinema, specifically, and you'll find it a lot in various forms of media where we start at the end, the dramatic, climactic end, and then we flash to the beginning and try to get you to how did this happen? How did this crazy scenario come to exist? The only issue is whether or not that pays off. And I don't feel like it did. So, the real question is, how would I have done it differently? How would I have improved the beginning of the game in order to give you a chance to really connect with the characters in the prequel, so to say, in the preluding conflict, in the whole section where we get Clive, his brother, his dad, his mother, and how all of that plays out. How would we do it different without adding a bunch of extra cutscenes? Because let's be honest, it's already heavy at this point in the game. In the new beginning, we would start from the point where Clive is training with Murdoch for being the first shield of Rosaria. I would want to spell this out a little bit more in this particular cutscene. And the reason it's a good starting point is similar to why, games like The Witcher started at the same spot. You're teaching somebody mechanics without really spending a lot of time on too much exposition or too much of a mystery on where the story's at and where the story is going. You have an idea of what the action is going to be in this game. And similar to Witcher, you could even start with Clive maybe, coming out of the castle or trying to like get down to the training grounds in order to be able to make the training if you really want to do a walking simulator for the first couple of cutscenes, right? Because it seems like this is a fairly common gaming trend nowadays where we need to teach people that you can use one stick to move and the other stick to look around. If we need to hold hands, that's fine, we can do it that way. But that also gives us a chance, if we do the walking simulator, to introduce Jill and Joshua that way, as those characters are integral to the development of Clive's character, especially later in the game. So, what we can do is really introduce Jill as this sort of person that Clive is connected to, that they are important to him, right? We really get a chance to have her, I don't know, wake him up or try to get him to his training on time or run interference with mom, something like that. Something that gives her a chance to be a bit more of a character at the beginning of this game. And the reason this is important is because, with the way the story originally goes, when Jill is first introduced to the game, truly, is in a cutscene where, at best, you might think she's a servant, maid, right? I did not think that she was a princess, that's for sure. I had no idea who she was or what she was doing there. I had no idea about her until I read all of the different articles about her later on in the game, right? I didn't know who she was until I pulled that up. And that is kind of an issue. She really isn't a character because she's not meant to matter right now in the way the story is originally written. So, what we can do from there is we get Clive to Murdoch. We go through our training sequence. And now we've gotten that introduction, right? We have a little bit more character development for, you know, Clive. We have a bit more character development for Jill. We have a bit more character development for Murdoch, for Joshua, even Annabelle. I think it's too early to introduce Elwyn. As Dad just doesn't need to be in this part of the game. He does have his triumphant return where that starts to change things, but we need that to be a little bit later because we have to do that as a means to get Clive out into the marshes so that he can have his first, dramatic, if you will, or climactic beginning. It's important that this part of the game we get our introductions in for the characters that are meant to matter to the story both long term and short term. And the reason being is we're really not going to get another opportunity to help you understand that before the fall of Phoenix Gate and the actions that are going to transpire there. And we don't want to spend a lot of time in this part either. I do think adding, a bit of content, a bit of extra, schmooze, if you will, is beneficial to this part of the game, right? We do need to add to what is there because it's really bare bones at this moment. So there's nothing that I can do about that other than to say we do need to add a few things. But I feel like this beginning gives us the best opportunity to really hone in and really fix some of those problems. With the lead up to Phoenix Gate, we would really keep a lot of this the same, actually. From the point where we defeat Murdoch and we continue along to find out a bit more information about Joshua, about the Phoenix, about the world that we're, meant to interact with. I don't think we should change too much of that. Even Annabelle's disgust for her son, right? Even Joshua trying to be helpful to Clive. I might give Joshua a bit more character in this new beginning. I really want to get an idea of why Clive is so tied to the identity of being Joshua's shield. And the reason I say that is because we do need a little bit more as to why he is so broken at the conclusion of this particular event, where Joshua is murdered by the second icon of fire. In a lot of ways, Clive's descent into being broken makes sense if you think about it, but you really need a chance to connect with Joshua as a character in order to feel that way yourself about the situation. For it to not be just Clive's problem, for it to also be a little bit of your problem, and to make you a little bit angry at whoever murdered your brother. Like, you need a chance to invest in the story just as much as you need to understand why Clive feels the way he does about it. So, the best way to do that is by giving Joshua just a bit more story going into the next part. And I have a couple of ways we can do that pretty eloquently without spending a ton of time on exposition robot trying to just give you a cutscene that is supposed to tell you the thing. We really do need to spend a little bit more time on maybe one more mission for Joshua, something that you get to do in between Clive in the swamps and you getting to the Phoenix Gate. So, really, the next part of the changes that I would recommend, or the way I would retell the story, is we would add in some form of a conflict on the road for Elwyn and Joshua as a means to really get a chance to introduce those characters, but also not spend a ton of time on them as they're both about to die. But it would help in the sense of getting this idea of showing Joshua as this character who is a benefit to these people, to the citizens of Rosaria, right? It's important because now we get a chance to have everyone else be invested in Joshua and his journey. And when he ultimately passes away, make it feel so much more real than it actually is in the game currently. Phoenix Gate is ultimately meant to be a bloodbath. The whole point of this section of the story is to really get a chance to introduce you to the soldiers of Rosaria, to Murdoch, to Elwyn, to Clive to Joshua, right? We get a chance to invest in the camaraderie as well as the revered nature of these beings or these characters in this story. And so it makes it all the more real, all the more heartbreaking, all the more painful when we get to the moments where the keep is under attack, where the soldiers are being slaughtered, and where all of this is happening. And I feel like really maturing this part of the story is to let it breathe more. Because at some point, we end up just cutting to Joshua and walking down a few hallways attacking people after everything has already happened. But I feel like really getting a chance to see some of that as we're walking, to like look out the windows and see soldiers who are unarmored fighting armored soldiers and losing might be a really hard thing to watch, but also really a good thing for us to see. Ultimately, we need to see these things that are hard for us to see or to watch or to go through in order to feel that conflict. And in this case, you can show rather than having to tell how bad things are for these people. Now, if they don't want to go this hardcore, I totally understand it because I tend to be that kind of a storyteller. I want Joshua and Clive and Elwyn to feel helpless, which means I want you, my dear viewer, to feel helpless in this moment. At this point, I do need to warn everyone that the next clips we're going to play is hard to watch. It is beautifully written, and it works so well in context of the story. The big thing here, though, is that we are going to watch something hard to see, something that, if we have done our jobs correctly, pays off immensely as the story continues, as we continue down the road, and as we ultimately get to the most broken part of Clive's journey to this point. This is his setback as a hero. This is the thing that changes the trajectory of his entire life. This is the defining moment where he finally is broken for the rest of his days. For the next 13 years, he becomes a shell of a man. And it is so beautifully written already. There is nothing we need to change. To skip this part, though, I do recommend you check the description. There will be a link to the sort of safe period at the end of this, as viewer discretion really is advised. This is triggering. So please, take care of yourself on this one. with the bloody mess of Phoenix Gate behind us, we get to go into our new beginning for the future, right? We get a chance to say 13 years later, and we should cut to that same cinematic of Clive and the various members of the assassins group that are joining him to come in and attack and kill the dominant of Shiva. That whole beginning part needs to stay there with the fire, and we can still use that same cut scene after the fire, where we kind of cut over to the members of the Waloed Alliance and the Holy Empire, Sabrique and Benedicta, and we're really starting to introduce the characters that you're actually going to be working with for the majority of the rest of the game. We get a chance to actually introduce them and that story together in this particular instance. And so, what becomes important here is that we can really start to focus in on this part of the story. Now, we don't have this sort of thing in the back of our head of like, well, what's going on? We kind of know already, right? We know that Clive is broken. We know that he had all these issues. We're not feeling very good ourselves, and now we're kind of being thrust into this new conflict without a lot of context. And that's not a bad thing right now. We need a distraction, right? We need something that forces us out of our, you know, pity party, for lack of a better phrase, and into the story. So from here, we can cut out the stupid walking bits. We don't need them. We've already taken care of that. And so that gives us a little bit of time back from previous cutscenes. But really, we should start off with the sort of conflict, the fire, and then kind of the descent into the field in order to get to the dominant of Shiva. And this can all come right after the conflict between Shiva and Titan. I think keeping that little bit where we're running is a decent starting point. Also, it does give us a chance to really flesh out very briefly, Beost and Wyvern and Tiamat and whoever that third guy is, who I don't remember his name, but he's the one who catches the axe to the chest. A clip that I may not necessarily share because YouTube has a pretty interesting policy when it comes to certain parts of that, and well, yeah, I'm not sure. But we will see. What I want to make sure that we understand, though, is we can kind of get a chance to really keep a lot of that the same. We don't have to change all that much. The most we might consider is just adding a little bit of banter back and forth as they are walking around. Right after the conflict, like right before Shiva and Titan have their epic battle, maybe we can have them speak a little bit as you're having to run through some of the battlefield. Heck, maybe even have them beat up a couple of scouts on the side or something like that if you really want to add a combat or two in there just to break up the monotony. But ultimately, we need to get Clive into the battlefield with Jill, and we need to have Clive beat Jill. Again, it's good that he doesn't know this, right? That part of this is fine that they have their epic clash and that we get through that fight, we get through that battle, we really get a chance to work through those issues. But also, it would be really beneficial for the story if we really just had that extra time with Jill at the beginning to understand a little bit more about her. So when Clive ultimately realizes who she is, when we get to that brief moment where there's the tear coming down her cheek and Clive is having his flashback, I feel like there's a brief, very brief clip of, you know, Clive and Jill and their history and getting a chance to have like that first introduction, maybe spend 4 minutes at most, 3 to 4 minutes on just introducing that character again in the story, but really understanding that emotional connection that he has, that he is willing to kill this person who is kind of his only reason to exist right now for Jill. Like, I understand why he would do that from a narrative perspective, but the story, it doesn't make sense. You don't know who she is. At best, right now, she is a maid, because if you don't read all of the prompts that you have to go into a special screen for to get to this point, you have no idea who Jill is, or what she is, or why she's important. You have no idea other than she is connected to Clive's past. Like, come on, this is really poor storytelling. It is lucky that Clive gets a chance to wake up here. But why would he put his life on the line for this girl that we haven't had a chance to connect with? We need to fix that. And I feel like, again, by spending that little bit more time with Jill in the beginning and spending that brief 2 minutes at best right now to make a cutscene that doesn't exist currently in the game, to go over, the part where Jill is accepted as a Rossfield, right? Where she is taken on as a ward of Rosaria, and her family has been, murdered by the Rossfields, and she's being taken in as a ward after a war between their two countries. Understanding that war and understanding where she came from might be a pretty cool thing right now. And really knowing that she was a princess, or some kind of royalty. I don't know if she was princess necessarily. I just remember reading it. But something like that would be pretty cool right here. And so that's where I would put it. Let's get Jill a little bit more backstory so that she's a much more interesting character for the story. Because ultimately, Jill doesn't get a lot of screen time in this moment. So, things to consider, things to clean up. There's a lot of character development in this part of the story. There's a lot of different factions, a lot of different, approaches that characters are going to be taking to the rest of the game. And so it really gets very interesting from this point forward. So I just want to call that out as, you know, the main thing to consider at this point of the game is what is going on, what is happening, and how we continue forward. That that is ultimately what the rest of these videos are going to be about. I feel like we need to start talking a lot more about each character, but this video's already gone long enough. This is a very brief overview of how I would change arguably 2 hours worth of a game, and it takes a long time to explain the alterations, the edits, and things of that nature. So, thank you so much for getting this far in the video. I will be making future content on kind of wasted character potential, um, things like Clive and Sid and their interactions, how to make a good character, how to avoid making a bad character, how to really flesh out your notorious villains to make them much better than what we've got. Because Annabelle's terrible. So we've got so many things that we can improve upon. I will make you hate Annabelle in a much different light than you do right now. I will make you hate Tiamat. I will make you hate the people that Clive is against because I know how to make a good villain. The ones we have right now aren't that great. So if you're interested in understanding how to make a good protagonist and a good antagonist, consider subscribing to the channel. Please, if you've got this far in the video, leave me a like. This is my first time making content this way, and it is long and it is wonderful, and I've had a lot of fun. This has been a blast. And I will leave this video with a thank you. Thank you to everyone who has watched my content, who continues to watch my content, and who is supporting this growth. This video was made fundamentally different than anything else I've ever done before, and I will continue to make videos in this way going forward, but they take a lot more time and a lot more effort, and this is a lot harder to do. So continue to support the channel, and that will help me to continue making content for you guys. As always, I will see you on the next one.